If you want to have success raising capital, follow the 3 C's. Build your confidence. That comes from being prepared and having the right team around you, building your credibility. That's going to be leaning on your expertise and making sure that you got the right folks who can help you drive success. And then lastly, your connections, expanding your network so you have the potential investors who are ready to invest with you.
Welcome, everybody, to a new episode. Today, we're going to dive into the fundamentals of apartment investing, from getting started to raising capital, all the way to building your own personal brand. And today, we sit down with a multifamily syndicator, podcast host, and consultant. Welcome, John.
Nathan, thank you for having me on today.
Absolutely. So let's jump into it. Before we kind of dive into the meat and potatoes, can you tell us a little bit about your background, your story, how you got to where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the short version of the story is I am a W-2 guy. I was in marketing and advertising for 15 years, and I worked for a couple of companies that faced bankruptcy. So, if you can imagine the feeling of not knowing where your next check is coming from and doing everything the quote unquote right way, going to college, getting a degree, getting a good job, but still having some issues as far as where you're going to make your money and how you're going to pay your bills. That is what ultimately led me into real estate. I started with a duplex, and from there, slowly started to build my portfolio. But like a lot of people, I started to running out of my own money, and that forced me to consider some other options. Ultimately, I found apartment syndication and partnered with other investors. To date, we have invested in over $140 million worth of apartments, and we work with everyday professionals to either work alongside them and help them invest passively, or to teach and coach them on how to do that, giving them the proven system and a blueprint to help them achieve success as an apartment investor.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, very similar story to kind of how Vic and Ravi got started with kind of coming from the medical background. It's nice that you kind of mentioned that you are, coming from that W-2, kind of job, right? Because a lot of, at least I feel like a lot of operators and syndicators start from kind of more that entrepreneurial background where they kind of had a W-2 and then transition more into kind of, hey, let's start businesses and let's go into real estate. But it's nice to kind of hear that story about someone who was in the corporate life, who was working that traditional 9 to 5 that then transitioned into, investing in multifamily specifically. So that's great. Can you talk us through a little bit about why, you felt like you had to transition away from the corporate job? Was there anything that was painful, or what were you kind of searching for when you went into kind of the real estate investing realm?
Yeah, so I mean, I started really, one of the earlier jobs I had, my first kind of real, career job out of school was at a 2-year fellowship program. And my client at the time was General Motors. When my fellowship was wrapping up, my old client got promoted, and I ended up being offered his old job. So I took that job, and I was working at GM. And again, you guys know what happened to GM back in the late 2000s. So the company went into bankruptcy. So I faced that. I watched it on the news every day, and saw the anxiety that not only I felt, but just all of my colleagues. And I really looked around the company to say, well, who really looks happy here? And I couldn't find anybody except for one guy. One guy. And I was looking up. So I was looking at the senior executives trying to find somebody. And I really looked across, and there was an older guy. He had kind of a marketing analyst role. But this dude came into the office every morning. Great energy, great joy, smile on his face, despite all of this. And I would talk to him, and I tried to ask him one day and said, man, look, everybody else is miserable going through this right now. Everyone's got their resume updated, we're interviewing and all that, right? I'm like, you got great energy. Why? What's going on? And he was like, well, I do this because I enjoy it. I don't need the money. He's like, I invested in real estate. I've got some other stuff. And that just triggered me, man. It just was like, okay, that's it. Like, hey, you need to have something else. So fast forward, I moved to Chicago. I started investing in the duplex, right? So I was trying to build up my own portfolio. And what happened was I bought a 2-unit, a 3-unit. My wife and I, we saved our money and bought these properties. We bought an 8-unit building. And shortly after I bought that 8-unit, the company I was working for, which is an advertising agency, it also went bankrupt. And here I was, and I was facing that fear almost, where now I had a family. When I was at gym, I didn't have a family. It was just me. But now I've got two young kids. I have a wife. I have a family to take care of, and my company is going into bankruptcy. And while we had some real estate investments, the reality is I didn't have the cash flow to replace my W-2 income. I had just put down a 6-figure investment into that last deal. So I had some equity, but I didn't have the cash flow. So I really realized that my strategy wasn't working for what I was really trying to solve for. And that's really a big key. I think so many people start investing in real estate because they hear you can make money and get cash flow and, appreciation, all these great things. But you really have to understand what your goal is and have a plan, have a vision of what you're looking to accomplish, and then find the right strategy that helps you. In my case, I was always limited by how much money I had saved at any moment in time. If I
Mhm.
didn't have money saved to buy a property, I couldn't buy a property. Didn't matter if you gave me the smoking hot deal across the street. I didn't have enough money saved. So I realized that my strategy was flawed, particularly when that second company went into bankruptcy. And again, I know every investor can understand what it's like to run out of your own money. Picture running out of your own money and essentially losing your job at the same time. That's kind of the moment I was facing when I realized I had to make a pivot.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of folks feel that way. I feel like, especially again, going back to that, medical background that Vic and Ravi come from. I know that, Ravi often tells a story that he was just in the break room when he was first getting started in real estate, when he was buying his duplexes and his triplexes, and he was just striking up conversations with, medical doctors and surgeons and just anybody who wanted to have a conversation outside of kind of, hey, let's not talk about medical stuff. Let's talk about kind of stuff that actually excites us, stuff that we want to get into, like real estate. And I feel like that's the same for a lot of these like physicians and those that are in the corporate world, is that for a while it feels very safe, right? If for a while you had that job, it pays well. Yes, there's long hours, but you're still making, a decent income. You have a good house. You got, everything you kind of need. You're comfortable. And then you have that kind of rug pulled out from under your feet. I mean, in your sense, in your story, John, like the truest sense of the story where you went bankrupt, or you didn't go bankrupt, your company went bankrupt, and then you go to a different company and that goes bankrupt. And then you're like, man, the system that I thought was supposed to provide me of the perfect life where you go to college, you get the good job, you put, money into your retirement account, that doesn't really always kind of, paint the picture of giving you that foot into your onto financial freedom, but more so kind of puts you in this kind of like survivor or thrive kind of mentality where it's like, man, I can't rely on the system anymore, right? There's got to be a different way. So, how did you actually get started when you were, you had, duplexes, you had some real estate, but you didn't have the cash flow? If you had to go back and really kind of start over, how do you kind of start again, investing in multifamily?
Well, I think my strategy actually worked out really well, and I would advise people to follow what I did. The one thing I would probably do different is I wouldn't get distracted with these shiny objects. So I always knew multifamily investing was a great path to building long-term wealth and passive income. What happened for me was and I'll tell the story in a second, but where I got distracted is I was trying to generate more income to buy properties. So I started trying to flip houses.
Mhm.
And I actually partnered with the developer. He had a process and a system of how he was flipping houses. And that worked until he outgrew his process and systems and never updated them. And at that point, things kind of collapsed and fell down. So that was my challenge, was I should have just stuck to multifamily as opposed to trying to, flip a little house over here on the side. And that actually sidetracked me and we lost money on that deal. But to go back, what was really important, and I think it's great for your listeners to understand, is after we bought our second property, we bought the 2 unit, the 3 unit, we were getting ready to buy that 8 unit building. At that point, I knew I wanted to scale. I knew this thing was working, this idea that I had in my head from all the books that I read and events that I've attended. Well, now it was real, right? I was making money. That first project, we built over 6 figures worth of equity. So I'm like, okay, this thing is working. How do I do more of this, right? So I started to learn about other people's money and raising capital. But I was fearful that I might lose somebody else's money. What I was doing was working, but I couldn't really articulate why, or I didn't have a proven system, right? It was more, hey, I feel like what I'm doing is working. I know that maybe these three things are important from all the books I've read, but it wasn't like I had a system. So I was trying to figure out how to grow and how to scale. And my wife and I actually attended one of those like 3 day seminar things, right? So this TV guru came on and we bought the one night, the 1 hour type thing. We bought the 3 day weekend. So we go to the 3 day weekend, and the first day, we're super excited. We're sitting there, we're listening, and we're like, man, maybe we should invest in this. And they wanted $35,000 for this program, right? So a big investment. And we were talking about it. We went to dinner that night and had a conversation. And we said, well, let's go to day two and let's see how we feel after that. So we go back to day two. And mind you, we had to hire a sitter to watch our son during this seminar. So day two, the mood changes from high energy, motivational to almost a shame, where they're trying to, shame you into, investing. What kind of person do you want to be? Do you want to leave a legacy for your family? You don't want to be this kind of dad, right? And as they're talking and they're passing out documents where they want you to fill out how much money you make and what you got in the bank account, I'm like, this feels like, a whole different thing now, right? The energy changed drastically. So at that moment, I said, let's really sit on this. And the guy went on stage and he said, well, listen, if you don't have the money right now, call your credit card company and ask them to increase your limits. And I was like, that definitely feels slimy. Like, we're out of here. So my wife and I, we actually cut out, we went home, and we knew we weren't going to go for day three because I mean, the pitch was only going to get worse from there, right? But what we did decide to do was to tap into the resources available to us. One of those resources was Bigger Pockets. So we went to the library, we spent all day there, got on Bigger Pockets, and I just made a commitment to be more active. One of the things that came from being more active is wanted to figure out where else we wanted to invest outside of our home market, which was Chicago at the time. My wife is from Cincinnati. Cincinnati is a market we liked. So I wanted to reach out to other Cincinnati investors. Lo and behold, a lot of people tagged this guy named Joe Fairless. And I said, hey, Joe, I made this post on Bigger Pockets about meeting Cincinnati investors. I'm going to be in town on this date. Would love to grab lunch. He says, sure. I've got this podcast. You'd be a great guest. And I'm like, podcast? Like, what? I'm like, hey, you're still going to meet me for lunch, right? And he's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So we do the podcast. We meet for lunch. And at that time, he tells me, well, and to give you context, this was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. So at the time, Joe was telling me that he had just done his first big syndication deal, raised $1 million, and he's developed a process on how to do that. And he was created a coaching program to teach other people. So I'm like, you know what? I considered spending 35,000 on these guys and didn't get a good vibe. Joe and I connected. We both came from advertising. He was in Cincy. I was, I had ties to Cincy. So I'm like, you know what? This feels like the right fit. So I ended up hiring Joe to help me. So that long story is really to help you understand that one of the biggest things is you have to find people who have gone down that path and have developed a proven system to help you achieve success. I got lucky, right? I got lucky to find a guy who was on the up and coming and catching him early. And we just happen to have a lot of things in common. But we also create our own luck. I go back and say, well, if I wasn't, attending that TV guru boot camp or seminar, maybe I'm not comfortable making that investment, right? But I had to do the deep work to say, hey, am I willing to invest in my real estate investing future? I did that deep work there, realized I was willing to invest, just not with those guys, right? And then when I came across Joe, well, I came across him because I was already active on Bigger Pockets. I reached out to him directly. I took that first step. I invited him out to lunch. So I took a lot of those steps to create that luck. And it's not like I just hired him on a whim. As I got to know him, well, this guy had already raised $1 million. This guy had a podcast where, forget me, he had Robert Kiyosaki on there, Barbara Corcoran, and all these other stars. So I'm like, well, he must know something. If he can get these individuals on the show, he must know something. So that's how that relationship started. So I do think it's really important to have great mentors and great coaches around you, particularly if you are going to work with other people's money. If you want to do it by yourself, by all means, go ahead, figure it out if you want to. But when you're working with other people's money, we all work hard for capital, right? Take the time, develop all the resources, educate yourself, and try to remove as many risks as possible so you can protect their capital. And that may and probably should include hiring a coach or a mentor.
Yep. So it's part of that, that onus of stewardship, right? When you take that kind of responsibility of not just, having your own deals or your own money, but now you kind of extend that offer. Now other people are trusting you with their hard-earned money and their own kind of time and effort. It becomes a whole different kind of burden that you're not dealing with. It's kind of funny that it's so serendipitous how those kind of dots connect on hindsight too, because the whole kind of reason that I got connected with Viking was almost a similar story. I was doing fix and flips and I connected with this investor for lunch, and he had mentioned this conference that everybody goes to for multifamily, and it turned out to be the best ever conference, the Joe Fairless. And there's this group that was looking for, part-time underwriter. And then I moved into property management team, and that, long story short, when I was working on property management, then I started connecting with Viking, and they, slowly over time, I started off doing part-time underwriting, then full-time underwriting, then their senior analyst, and kind of grew from there. But it's just so interesting. One, the power of community. I feel like specifically in multifamily, there are different other industries out there that have been in corporate real estate where it isn't always as nice. Or there are some different sectors that are very kind of cutthroat. And it doesn't seem to be that way in multifamily. It seems for the most part that everybody wants to help everybody out, build a community, be really kind of a part of something larger than they are themselves. So, if let's say I was a new investor looking to get into the game. I know that multifamily is kind of the direction I want to go, but I don't know what to do from there. What are kind of the first steps? Should I go active? Should I go passive? What kind of resources should I be attentive to? I'm truly kind of get my footing in multifamily investing.
That's a great question, right? So many people recognize that they can create wealth as a multifamily investor, but how do you get started? What steps should you take? The first thing I would say is do a little bit of an audit for yourself. What are your goals? What are you hoping to accomplish? Are you looking for just passive income? Are you looking for long-term wealth creation? Are you looking to diversify your portfolio? Are you looking to reduce your tax liability? Maybe you're looking to do all of those, right? But typically there's one or two that are really driving that conversation or that direction. Get clear on that. How much time do you have to actually, jump and spend into this? Do you have the time to be kind of the lead and to really commit to your education and the investments? Or do you have a full-time job? Are you a busy professional? Do you have other interests, family interests outside of real estate? Be honest with yourself because it's hard to find a deal if you can't commit the time and resources necessary to invest. Keep in mind, you're competing with full-time companies that have people on payroll where all they do is look to acquire properties. So if you can only look at stuff on your lunch break, be honest with how much time and energy you can actually commit to this. But then also go back to your experience. If you're getting started, that means you have limited, if not zero, experience as a real estate investor. Do you want to take all of that risk and responsibility on yourself, or would you feel more comfortable partnering with someone who has that experience, has gone through multiple deals, and leveraging that experience and credibility to invest with? So I tell most people, think about it, but for your average investor starting out who has never done a multifamily deal, their best bet is to invest passively first as an LP investor with another operator to either do a JV deal. Okay. So that way, maybe it's a smaller deal, even if it's a 6 unit or 8 unit, but maybe they bring the money, they partner with somebody else who has the experience. And it's kind of similar to, again, being an LP in a syndication deal. Maybe you're a little bit more hands on there. The third way, if you really want to be hands on and active and you don't have the funds to completely be passive, then I would be active, but I think you need to hire a coach or a mentor, or at a minimum, get a partner who has that experience. But you need to align yourself with people that can help mitigate whatever risk you have exposure to since you don't have that experience. But those are the three ways. I think investing as an LP is probably the smartest way because you're gonna, take on the least amount of responsibility, but still get a chance to learn while you earn. But if you really want to be hands-on, then I think you should double down and hire a coach or mentor. At a minimum, find a partner who's willing to work with you and allow yourself to grow that way.
At the very least, don't do it alone, right? It seems like a running theme. Either partner with others, partner with another operator, partner with a coach, do something. But the riskiest thing is to do it alone and to do it with limited knowledge, right? Those two things automatically make anything you do a lot more risky. So I love that advice. So I know you've talked with a lot of investors. You've raised a lot of capital, you've closed on a lot of deals. What do you think is paramount to building that relationship? Because as an investor, they can go in a multitude of different directions. They have a ton of different operators, a ton of different markets, a different asset classes they could invest in. Why would someone choose to invest with you or with Viking over somebody else? What makes it special about that kind of relationship that you're building with your audience as well as that we're building with our own audience as well?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we've had the pleasure of working with a lot of different individual investors and families who have invested in our deals. We work with a lot of other operators and syndicators to teach them and help them do the same. And it really comes down to what I call the three C's, right? These are the three C's to being able to raise capital successfully. The first C is confidence. Confidence cannot be manufactured. I am not talking about blind hubris. I'm not talking about faking it till you make it. I'm talking about the confidence that can only come from being prepared. You got to put in the work, okay? Put in the work. Study the deals, study the markets, understand where the challenges are, understand how do you mitigate risk, understand how to execute the right business plan. By being prepared, you're going to be confident, right? You can only get that by putting in the work, period. So it's not about regurgitating, data points or statistics or industry jargon. It's about understanding your craft. Take it seriously. Invest in your education. That's going to allow you to build confidence. Second C is credibility. Now, you need to look at what you've done in your own career that allows you to be credible in this space. For me, coming from marketing and advertising, not exactly, multifamily investing, but I had experience overseeing groups, right? Being a project lead, overseeing $100 million advertising campaign, driving success for my clients, under overseeing MSA or master services agreements, understanding those contracts, being in negotiations, overseeing these teams, being on both the agency side and the client side. So I understood how to be a great liaison between what two parties needed and how to drive a project and how to drive success. A lot of those skills are carryover. They carry over to any industry. So those were areas where I had success. Beyond that, I did have some real estate background, right? So I had my personal portfolio that I developed, but beyond my own personal credibility, I developed a team around me. So I hired that mentor we talked about. I brought on partners, I brought on contractors, I brought on property managers who had more experience in this space. So when I was looking at a deal or an opportunity, I could bring that to those individuals. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Now I've got my team's feedback and I can drive that decision making accordingly. So that credibility is the second thing that you need. The third C is going to be connections. And this is key. Most people assume you're going to raise money from your friends and family. And that is a big mistake. Listen, maybe you have the right friends and family who just so happen to be your avatar, right? The person you really want to raise money from. But most of us do not. Most people, our friends and family, are people we love who have little or no interest in real estate. Now, maybe they want the things we talked about, cash flow and appreciation and tax benefits. Of course, who doesn't want those things, right? But are they really interested in real estate? Probably not. So the mistake people make is trying to get their friends and family to invest with them. What
Mm,
I would suggest you do instead is lean into that network to help you expand your network. Okay. Lean into your friends and family to expand your network. That's going to be a better way to see success there. So if you want to have success raising capital, follow the three C's. Build your confidence that comes from being prepared and having the right team around you, building your credibility. That's going to be leaning on your expertise and making sure that you got the right folks who can help you drive success. And then lastly, your connections, expanding your network so you have the potential investors who are ready to invest with you.
absolutely. Absolutely. Let's touch on that second C. You know, the part of really kind of building credibility, building a track record, leaning into your brand. How do you really kind of set yourself apart or different than a lot of the other operators out there? Is it the service? Is it kind of your messaging? Because I know you have a wide experience in the marketing realm. Kind of curious as to, you know, how you use that marketing expertise and then applied it to kind of the capital raising side of multifamily.
I love that. That's a great question. One of the things people kind of miss is they think about marketing and branding. And if you're not really in that space or come from that world, it all kind of sounds the same, right?
Hmm.
Well, there's actually a pretty big and significant difference. Marketing is more about the messages that you put out into the marketplace. Branding is really more about how you're perceived. So to give you an example here, Nike can do an ad. That ad is marketing. Whatever you feel about Nike, whatever you think about them, that's their brand. And
Hmm.
it could be tied to an ad, tied to a sponsorship, tied to an affiliation, or tied to some of the news stories you've heard about them, right? Or tied to your experience with them working with their product, right? So that's the brand. It's how you feel. Branding is really what people think of you when you're not there to defend yourself. Okay. That's the brand. So marketing is a tool we leverage to help shape what people know about us and think about us. But it's really just a megaphone. That's all we're doing. We're taking a megaphone and we're trying to highlight our best qualities. I was listening to this book this morning as it's called Marketers Are Liars. And one of the things that they talk about is at a certain point, like your truth will come through. If you fall short on certain services or quality of product or whatever, that's going to come through. So what's really important for people is not to get too caught up in being slick and smooth and those kind of things, but really understand what their investors are looking for, what their clients are looking for, and to make sure we're putting together a product, a service, and offering that solves for those needs. So if you're going to be offering great customer service, then do that. If you're going to make sure you're conservative on your deals, then do that, right? Because at a certain point, if you're not, it's going to come through and people are going to recognize that. So from my standpoint, there's the marketing tools and initiatives that you can develop. And we definitely have kind of created a system on how we market, depending on whether you're a one person show or you got a full suite of teams. But the reality is you kind of have to tighten up whatever it is you're doing and stand out. If I could give you just a different example real quick. if you think of like Dollar Tree, right? Dollar Tree as a brand, like everyone's going to have an opinion. Maybe it's not for them,
Mhm.
cheap products, inexpensive products, whatever, right? That's not a brand most people would want associated with their business if you think about it, right? Like most people don't want to be known for having the cheap products, right? But it shows that there's an audience that loves that, that caters to that, that wants to have inexpensive things. And there's a positive, like we always focus on the negative, but there's a positive connotation too, right? It's inexpensive. It's, something that, I don't have to worry about spending a lot of money on. And that's because they don't see a lot of value in over investing in those items, right? If it were something that they did see value in investing more money, they wouldn't shop at the Dollar Tree for those items. So that's kind of the rub. And I think as a brand, you have to decide who you are and what you stand for. If you have a cheap product, then you need to focus the branding on that, right? Is hey guys, we have a very affordable product. If
Yeah.
you have a very high-end, expensive product, then your branding kind of goes there. So there's not a right or wrong way, but I do think you need to help your audience understand if your product or service is a fit for them so that they understand what that value exchange is going to be.
Yep. Yeah, to really kind of lean in and double down on your messaging there for sure. Do you think it's when you're in if you are kind of a syndicator and you say, hey, I want to go kind of more active route. I want to be the steward of other people's capital. I want to, really take on that responsibility. Do you think it's better if they kind of pinpoint, hey, this is my specific avatar of the person I'm serving? Or do you think it's a better kind of strategy to say, hey, I'm finding good deals and anybody who wants to join me is welcome to join me? What's kind of the marketing or the messaging or the branding? Is it more kind of a broad open net, if you will, or is it more kind of a targeted approach when you go into to your target audience?
Another great question. I'm going to flip that on you just to illustrate my point. Let's take trying to think of a product. Let's take Prime. Are you familiar with the Prime
Yeah.
drinks? Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Who is Prime's target?
My guess would probably be like teenagers, like 18, 19 year olds.
18, 19. All right. I would skew a little longer,
Maybe,
younger.
yeah, maybe a little
I,
bit younger, like middle
I
school,
yeah. So
freshman into high
middle
school.
middle school to 18, right? Let's just call it 12
Yeah,
to 18, maybe 24-year-olds, right? Okay. So how many of those 13-year-olds are out there buying Prime themselves?
probably not many. Maybe at the gas station there, but not
So
not.
so who's buying Prime?
It's probably gonna be the parents of those kids.
Their parents. So there's two different things here you got to keep in mind. There is our target profile and then there's our buyer profile. So
Mm,
for kids, and the reason I use that example is Prime and companies like that, they target children, right? The younger ones who want this product or service, right? They're going to go and tell mom, hey, mom, I want Prime. I don't want that flavor like this flavor, right? So
yeah.
mom now knows, oh, okay, he likes the yellow one, not the blue one. So mom still is the one who has to go buy it. Well, guess what? If mom goes to the store and she sees something else, mom still has the ultimate buying decision making, right? She's got the power.
Yeah.
So you've got to keep mom in mind, even though, little Tommy is saying, I want the yellow one. The
Mhm.
reason this is important is when you're developing your target profile, who you're investing with, you may have someone in your mind. I talk to investors all the time, syndicators who say, "Hey, I want to work with doctors or high net worth individuals." They have no connections to doctors or high net worth individuals, but that's who they want to target because they assume those individuals have money, right? Well, you have to understand there's got to be a reason for these people to want to do business with you. What's that connection? Why
Mhm.
would they want to do business with you? On top of that, they may not be the sole decision maker. So who else can influence this decision? How many times, and I'm sure you've seen this, or at least the team at Viking has seen this, where you talk to an investor and they say, hey, this sounds great. Let me talk to my wife. Let me talk to my financial advisor. Let me talk to my business partner, right? There's another decision maker that's involved. So I think part of what you have to do is understand who are you uniquely positioned to serve. And that's not going to be the same for everyone. So we definitely will, figure out who we're uniquely positioned to help, but we're not turning down money if as long as that person is qualified to invest with us. We
Mhm.
have found that even though in our heads we have one target investor that we create our content and our materials for,
Mhm.
sometimes that message resonates with other people. We call it a psychographic, not a demographic. And all that means is people who resonate with the mentality of what we're talking about versus the actual, demographic, the age, the race, the
Yep.
location. I used to work on the Mountain Dew brand. This was so prevalent there. We would target kind of a 13 to 24-year-old drinker, in LA and Miami and, these fun cities. Do you know who actually drank Mountain Dew? It was a 60-year-old white dude in the middle of Ohio, and I'm from Ohio, so this is not a knock on Ohio, right? But that's who the drinker was.
Hmm.
If you go back and look, you will never see an ad targeted to that guy.
Yeah.
You will
Yeah.
never see it. But if you look at our buying demographics, that's who's actually buying it, right? Some
Uh,
dude in the Midwest, in the middle of nowhere, who just loves his Mountain Dew, right? Somewhere in West Virginia or something like that. But we would always create advertising where, again, do the do. So it's guys on kids on skateboards and kids doing
mm,
the X Games, and it was
mm,
always this fun, energetic thing, but it never tied with who was actually buying the product. So we have to understand that there's a target of who we are creating content for or creating messaging for, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that is always the person who resonates. There are people who are going to resonate with your message for various reasons, right?
yeah.
And that psychographic of that 60-year-old guy in the middle of nowhere, he may very well connect with it, right? He may feel young at heart. Even though he's 60, he may feel like that rebel who wants to go skateboard or who just wants to do something against the, what others think he should be doing. It could just be that they just purely love the taste. Maybe they just love the product, right? For you guys, I mean, sometimes it's just they're local, right? If, as
Yeah.
investors, oh, he's in Chicago or I'm in Cincinnati and they're in Cincinnati, great. Wasn't the target, but they got to meet me and they can't meet everybody else. So that's it, right? So we never know why someone will connect with you. And that's why you don't want to make it too tight. But I do think it helps to be clear on the kind of people you help because that makes it easier for someone else to say, hey, I like those guys. I like what they stand for. They're for me, or I want to work with them. If you say nothing, if you have no opinion, if you never show up, then people can't, they won't know you exist, first of all. But second
Mhm.
of all, they won't know what you stand for. And it's harder to make that connective tissue with each other if they don't know what you really represent.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love that terminology of psychographics, right? Because I feel like that's a lot easier for people to kind of grasp their head around is, hey, how do I think about a deal or what's different about the way that I think or the way that I perceive or the way that I analyze, right? If you can find a unique aspect in that sense, it's a lot easier to say, hey, I'm just going after this target audience or this people that I'm trying to serve. The same thing happened on the Viking side of things. A lot of our messaging is focused on physicians and medical backgrounds, but we have all sorts of different types of folks that invest because they come in through different channels and they kind of understand that it's not just centered for physicians. Obviously, you're not going to turn away money if you're not a physician, right? John, just out of curiosity, this is something that I was thinking about while you were talking about the story of the Mountain Dew and
Yeah.
the 60-year-old guy in Ohio who's drinking it. What do you think would happen to the brand if they decide to shift their kind of messaging and their marketing and go after that 60-year-old in Ohio who's drinking the Mountain Dew? Do you think the brand would suffer? Do you think it would change at all? Just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it will suffer. You got to keep in mind a couple things here. In the marketing world, and particularly for products and services, you have to think of the life of a customer. So at a certain point, I don't know how old you are, but at a certain point, people have their preferences, right? And if you can lock them in early enough, you pretty much got them for life outside of some like, jarring event. Like that guy who drinks Mountain Dew has been drinking Mountain Dew for probably 40 years, right? Like that's his drink. You're not gonna show up one day and say, "Hey, man, don't drink this Mountain Dew. Drink whatever instead." Like he's like, "No, man, I'm gonna go to another store." Like he is a
Yeah.
loyalist, right? So in the marketing world, we have a funnel, but he's a loyalist. That's what he drinks. That's what his preferences is. So it's the same thing with beer, right? A guy who's a Budweiser guy or a guy who's a a Miller Lite guy or whatever it is, they drink what they drink. That's what they enjoy, right? They might try different stuff. They may have other things that they will drink, but they have a preference. And once they're at a point in their life, that preference is the preference. So what would happen in that particular case if you start targeting that 60-year-old? Well, those 13-year-olds are not drinking it, right? Because they're like, oh, that's the old dude's car. That's the old dude's drink. They're not drinking that. Someone else is going to take that and they probably won't discover it. So there's a little rule in marketing that you always target younger because everyone wants to feel younger. The
Hmm.
30-year-old wants to feel like they were 20. The 40-year-old wants to feel like they were 30. The 50-year-old wants to feel like they were 40, right? So adults always want to feel younger, right? Look younger, feel younger, right? That's why we have all the surgeries and the creams and everything else, right? Nobody wants to be older. No one wants to feel older. So if you show that imagery of some older dude doing something, nobody wants it, right? It's like the AARP. Like
Yeah.
no one is looking forward to being an official member of AARP. That's like, oh man, I'm there for real. Wow. Oh, this 55 plus. now I can get the seniors discount. Like it's not something people aspire to, right? You kind of go with it when it hits you, but it's not something you're super excited about.
Yeah.
So it's the psychographic of it, right? It's just the mental. Like people don't really want to think about aging or picture things like that as much, and it's easier to disassociate anything that feels older. I would say too, just to broaden your question, because we also face this with male female demographic, especially in beer, where we would have discussions about, hey, can we make ads that are targeted to women?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because there are various groups where you can target one group and still get everyone else, but sometimes if you target a different group, you will lose others. And
Mm-hmm.
with beer, that was one of those sensitive areas where you can definitely target beer to women because I think now, especially the younger generation, they spend more time together across genders. So it's not as, abnormal for different groups to sit there and get a case of beer with girls and guys drinking the same thing. Whereas maybe a generation ago, if the guys thought a drink was too light or soft or whatever, they would see that as a girl's beer and they wouldn't want to drink that. So it's all about the psychology of it when it comes to the target and how they're going to react if they see that. I mean, that's why you see again, one of the oldest things you'll see in all of advertising and marketing is sponsorships where you put your product on the hot young up and coming talent, LeBron James for the last 20 years to
Mm-hmm.
all of the athletes. Well, you do that because you want that association with them, right? You want that association. You want to be cool. This individual's using your product. That's a rub that you get. So you kind of have to just be careful because that's a two-way street.
I love that. I love that. Well, John, this has been a phenomenal episode. I feel like it's a little bit of a psychoanalysis almost into, an expert marketer and syndicator. If our folks want to get a hold of you or reach out to you, what's the best way to do so?
The easiest thing is really to check out our website. We have our own podcast called Multifamily Insights, but on our website, we've got some different resources. We have 35 hacks to find the best places to invest. We have a sample deal package. We have seven things to watch out for when you're analyzing a deal. So you have some free resources there. You get our newsletter, but plenty of resources on our website. Just go to casmoncapital.com.
Phenomenal. Thanks, John. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe or a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time.